So this is a Q&A session. As you can see here, you can submit questions. So I will open it up to the floor now.
Hi, I'm Yelena. I'm the founder of Shared Workshop. We are a marketplace platform for factories to rent out their access factory floor space. We are doing it currently in Michigan. The question I have is we're still pretty early, so we currently have 6 factories on the platform and another 15 that have said that they're going to join the platform. One of the problems I find in building a two-sided marketplace is that some of, particularly the larger factories, don't want to join until they see a critical mass, so they want us to do their work behind the scenes. How do you overcome that kind of critical mass question or concern that some individuals have? I equate it to you don't want to be the first girl on a dating platform, so you don't want to be the first factory on a factory platform.
Yeah, I can start with that. It's a great question. At TaskRabbit, people would always ask me, what comes first, the supplier demand, the chicken or the egg problem? And so for us at TaskRabbit, we would always focus on supply first. And we were very narrowly focused in building our supply by geography, by category, by time of day and availability. So I'm not sure if there are shortcuts, in your model that you can take. But for us, it was very deliberate, sort of the build up neighborhood by neighborhood until it became network effects kind of pumping.
Great. Well, I think we actually have a couple coming in, so I'll read one for kind of the group here. So how did you get your ideas for your businesses? Kind of touched on that quickly, but any tips for someone I think, who would love to start their own business but doesn't have an idea yet?
I'll start. So my idea came because I was out of dog food one night. And I was like, there's got to be someone in this neighborhood that can get me my dog food. But this was back in 2008 when the iPhone had just come out. There was no app store. No one was building location-based aware systems. And so it was very early technology days. Before I had this idea for TaskRabbit, though, I had all kinds of other ideas that some were good, some were bad, some were who knows. I think that my point is I trained myself to think entrepreneurially and to look at every situation in my daily life as an opportunity. And so if I would hit a problem or hit a challenge, instead of just kind of going through it like we usually do and moving on with our lives, I would stop and think, like, can I solve this for me? Can I solve this for hundreds of thousands of others as well? And so I think maybe going through your day and looking for things in the real world that are real pain points to you might be a good way to come up with the next big thing.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I actually really look for ideas that feel very authentic to that entrepreneur. One thing that I really don't like is when it's clear that someone has sat at a whiteboard trying to come up with great entrepreneurial ideas, because that origination story is never great. And in fact, if it's one of the 50 possible ideas I could have pursued rather than the one that I had to build, then oftentimes when really the hard part of building a company comes up, like, you give up, right? It has to be really ingrained in you as a problem that you have to solve.
Any in the audience? Maybe we can form a line or something, or easier to get to people.
We're submitting the questions via the
Yeah,
app.
okay, that's fine. I'm going to try to go back and forth.
Hi, Leah. I had the pleasure of listening to a podcast. I'm not sure if it was Reid Hoffman's or the acquired one, but they mentioned TaskRabbit as an example of how potentially more niche competitors tend to disintermediate the business, the way Craigslist was picked off one at a time. Do you think that was a real challenge for you? I'm also running an online business, a family consumer business called Dreamlist.com, and I'm wondering whether being more general or being more focused on specific niches is better. I was wondering, based on your advice.
So my point of view is when we were building TaskRabbit, and particularly when we were raising money, one of the questions we would always get from investors is, what do you do about gray market? What do you do about disintermediation? And in any marketplace business, that's a real thing to think about. And my answer would always be, listen, it's a two-sided marketplace. yes, I'm not so naive to say this is never going to happen, but I also believe that in whatever you're building, you have to build enough value on the platform for people to want to be there. There has to be some incentive beyond money on both sides that keeps people there and keeps people sticky. And, you know, for us, it was a lot of different things. It wasn't just one thing. And so I think, one, recognizing that, you know, it's a problem in every marketplace business, but two, thinking about ways that you can really create value for the whole community and both sides is what's important.
I think there are a lot of early stage companies out here, and one of these top questions I think would be relevant to a lot of them, which is how did you spread the word about TaskRabbit, especially, you know, when you got started and actually, you know, later when it really started to take off?
Yeah, I mean, early days was a lot of word of mouth, sort of on the ground marketing. I mean, literally the first 6 to 7 years, we didn't spend very much at all. I would even say a dime on marketing around paid acquisition because we wanted to, one, get the product right and get that really good. And then we would see that word of mouth would be what really drove the business. I mean, 80% of our customers came in through free channels, word of mouth. We did a lot of PR that came very organically. So we were fortunate in that. And then it wasn't until the later stages that we actually started to test a lot of different paid acquisition channels, like SEM and retargeting, and radio and all kinds of other things as well. But I think, you know, figuring out how you can leverage your current customers and your current product to kind of bring on that next cohort of customers is, you know, a great thing. Investors like when you don't spend a ton of money on marketing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we say often at Floodgate is you have to hack value before you hack growth. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is that they raise capital and then you feel like you can spend it, and so then you spend it on acquiring customers because then you get that graph that shows usage is going up and to the right. And the problem with that is that it's a drug, right? The minute you do that, then in order to get your next bump of growth, you have to acquire those crappy customers that you just acquired and then spend even more to acquire even worse customers. And so you really want to make sure that your value really resonates without having to pay for it. Because those customers who come to you organically are coming to you for a real reason. You're solving a problem for them. And so we see this time and time again. Like, don't think about acquisition as a toolkit. It's something that you have to be able to do through your customers. And then you grow the business once you're able to really articulate what value you provide to those customers.
And just to continue on that point, then I'll go to the audience here. But as you're looking at these companies, you know, how do you help them define kind of product and market fit? And what metrics do you look for in the companies that you're investing in? And also, obviously, Leah, you as well, now that you've moved to this side of the business.
I think, you know, that I hate this answer because it's like, it sounds so trite. It really depends because it depends on the type of business that you're building. So if you're talking about a SaaS business, then obviously we are looking at monthly recurring revenue. But actually the way I think about, or within a marketplace, you're going to look at GMV and take rate. But what I actually really like to look at the very early stages is not the absolute value, but actually what I call like the derivative, right? So month to month or week to week, what is changing and what's driving that change? So if you have monthly recurring revenue, what's the delta between January and February? How did that delta come about? Was it from increased new users? How did you acquire those new users? Was it expansion? What happened with churn? Those are the details that if you look at in the early stages, it's not an accounting exercise. It is really understanding the nature of the growth of your business. That's what I'm looking to understand at the early stage. It's no sort of watermark that you have to meet. It's understanding, oh, this is what's driving that element of your business and that growth. And if I put more money into it, now we know like we can actually drive more of that.
I think you also just answered another question here, which is what is the number that you look at every day? So kind of looking at some of those aspects in those early growth companies. I saw some hands over here. Just take one from the audience.
Hi, my name is Jane. I just want to continue the topic. So we have an app. It has like free and paid version, and on early stage we were focusing on the paid version. So our customer acquisition cost is three times lower than lifetime value. So it works, and we grow like 30% a month. And but talking with investors, it looks like, for example, that free users and expansion and PR and this bump and sensing of it's hot is more important than actually profitable unit economics. Do you know how investors and VC choose what they are looking at more on customers or free users?
I'll start, because I lived this with TaskRabbit, super profitable business, positive unit economics, raised $50 million in venture funding, but it wasn't always easy, right? It wasn't always easy. And so being on the investor side now, I think one of my biggest surprises is that when you meet with an entrepreneur and you talk with them about their business, there are about 1,000 other reasons and other factors of why it may not be a good fit for you or your fund at that moment in time that have nothing to do with you or your business. And that was such a shock and surprise to me, going from being a founder and raising this money and getting hundreds of no's from investors and taking it really personally and thinking why? This is a great business. Ann and
I took personally too.
So it's just, it's one of my biggest surprises being on the other side. It has nothing to do with you or your business. There's 1,000 other reasons why.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people think that it is, you need to have a hot company, and what is the definition of hot? I think there's actually a lot of investors who are more first principles thinkers, and I've been really pleasantly surprised by that. But as Leah's saying, there's a lot of things that we're balancing. There's sort of our portfolio, what we're focused on. There's also size of market. Is the nature of the business one that we believe has sort of the general ambition that is aligned with our ambition? And I think a lot of times people believe that if you are a startup company, then you should be able to raise venture dollars, and I just disagree with that. I think there are a lot of companies that are started by entrepreneurs that should actually never raise venture financing, that should just be cash flow positive, should be wholly owned by the founder until you decide maybe you want to raise money. And people raise money because it's the thing that they need to do, not because it's strategic to the business.
That's great. I think we have some questions lined up on the left here, so we'll go over here.
So an online marketplace, especially one that relies on word of mouth, can be very, very lean. So for people who are especially bootstrapping, what are the things that are important to spend on? And which of those are so important that it would trigger you to go after fundraising if you were otherwise self-sufficient?
Oh, I love that question. It's a really good question. I'm trying to think back to the early days of TaskRabbit when I was bootstrapping and we didn't have a lot of money. I'm tracking you. I think for me, one of the choices we made was to bring someone in-house instead of hiring a really expensive, fancy PR firm that you pay like 15 grand a month. You feel like you're throwing away that money sometimes, and you can't really see the value out of it. Once we figured out, and literally this was like me knocking on reporters' doors, telling them the story of TaskRabbit, sharing stories of what had happened on the site, them writing about it, and seeing like a huge lift in both sides of the marketplace. That's when I decided, if we could get like a really hotshot junior, PR comms type person, pay them a salary which ends up being like 6 to 7K a month, maybe that's actually a smarter spend. And that's what we did. It ended up driving a lot of skill for us in years, I would say 3 to 7. And so I think it's about testing on your own as you're bootstrapped, these like little things, these little niches. And then to the extent you find something that works, then figuring out how to scale it up and take it off your plate as well.
I want to just go back to kind of what you guys were talking about in terms of that VC startup, matching there, because I think this is actually a really interesting question from both sides. So for Ann, what was the detail or characteristic that made you say yes on TaskRabbit? And from Leah's side, what detail convinced you that Ann was really going to be that right investor for you?
So in terms of my perspective, I actually, because I sit at the early stage, most of the businesses that we see are ideas that are iterations on things that we've heard in the past. It is the Instacart for, Japanese grocery delivery. And so those are not as interesting as a completely new idea you've never heard of. And if you roll yourself back to 2009, a localized marketplace, connecting people to people in real life interactions, was a completely new idea. And so this is before like Airbnb was big. This is before any of these companies that we see as traditional sharing economy businesses had actually any kind of traction or were brand names. And so to me, what Leah pitched was a mind-blowingly brand new idea I had never heard. And like, how often does that happen? It doesn't. It doesn't really happen that often, especially in Silicon Valley these days. And so with TaskRabbit, that's what was the magic. Leah had thought up of something that no one had ever heard of or thought of before.
And I think on my side, we met at a diner in Palo Alto over breakfast for the first time.
It was breakfast. That's what she saw.
Ann bought me breakfast. And I was like, okay. No, I mean, it was actually, I was in town for a week because I'm from Boston. That's where I was building the business. And in that week, it was my goal to, get a few term sheets, raise the seed round of funding, figure out who I wanted to work with, and get that deal closed. And so I was in town for a specific amount of time. I had met with a bunch of investors. I met Ann over breakfast. And what struck me about Ann is that she connected immediately with my vision for the company. And she understood what I was doing, not just on a product sort of tactical level, but in a bigger impact way. Like the impact that I wanted to have with this company, she as an investor understood and saw that vision alongside me. And I didn't get that conversation with every investor I met. In fact, very few investors I met, I felt like had this shared aligned vision in 2008 and 2009 like we did. And so it was an easy decision to work with Ann.
Great. Unfortunately, we are getting the 1 minute warning. I have time for one more question. I'm going to go over here. I've been patiently waiting.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Marwa, and I'm the co-founder of a B2C company called Trance. Leah, we've spoken over the phone before, but nice to meet you for the first time. So I have a question on regarding advice for fundraising. So for our company, we primarily have female consumers. So in a situation like that, how do you advise we go about with fundraising, given that a lot of investors are male and they're not our target users, and they often judge based on whether they see themselves being a user or not?
I'll start. I mean, I think from my standpoint, what I've realized now at being on the investor side is that oftentimes investors do judge based on like, I'm not the target market, I'm not the target user. You'll hear stories sometimes about how an investor will say like, oh, let me go home and like have my wife try this, right? Right?
Or my daughter.
Right? And you as the founder are like, great, like this is not going to go well for me. I think at the same time, what I realize is you're looking for partners that are going to be with you for the long term. Like Ann and I now have known each other for a decade. Crazy. And, this investor that you're pitching has to not only say like, yes, I believe in you and I'm going to write this check, but like, I want to know you for the next decade and I want to sit on your board and come to your board meetings every month and like, this is how I want to spend my time. And if I can only make 1 to 2 investments a year, like, this is how I want to spend my time with you and your company. And so like, there is this weird dynamic that if they're not the target user, like, and you're stacked up against like all the other hundreds of things that they're looking at or that are in the portfolio, like it is harder, I think, to get that attention from any investor that's not a target user. And so I think it's just good to be aware of that dynamic. I don't know what you have to add.
I think, the only thing I would add is, investors are rapacious capitalists, right? At the end of the day, we just love to make money. And so sometimes it's a lack of imagination. And so what you really need to do is, if they are not the target user, you need to educate them on why this is a compelling, gigantic market. And if they see that, if you can make them see that, they will love it, because that's what they're in it for, right? That's why they're funding stuff for like Gen Z millennials, and they aren't that target market. They just know that there's a huge market there. So if it's for women, you need to show that the market is really, really compelling, and you can't just rely on personal experience. You need to make it extraordinarily tangible.
That's great. I think that's a great point to end on, to make sure that you guys are, showing your value when going out to VCs. Well, I'd love everyone. Thank you guys both so much for being here. Really appreciate your time.